Welcome back to Twisted Tales of Murder. There's a popular myth that all serial killers are men. This concept is simply not true. Although female serial killers are rare, they very much exist, making up around 15% of all serial killers in the world. As late as 1998, a highly regarded former FBI profiler, Roy Hazelwood, claimed that there are no female serial killers. I'm sorry, Mr. Hazelwood, but you are wrong. Women are killers and, yes, serial killers, and they do engage in horrible acts of violence and murder. Unlike male serial killers, who are often driven by sexual lust, female serial murderers often take a much more sensible approach to their killings, as if any killing could be sensible. Female serial killers are much more likely than male to kill for profit. This is seen in the victims they target. They also tend to kill men who've been emotionally or physically close to them, particularly husbands or lovers. However, these are not the only people women kill. The news and entertainment media have popularized the female image of the Black Widow. The Black Widow serial killer is a woman who murders 3 or more husbands or lovers for financial gain. The Black Widow killer was first featured in the 1944 film Arsenic and Old Lace, starring Cary Grant. Although that movie was fiction, many serial killers have used arsenic and other poisons to kill their victims. Although female serial killers are less common, they can be very effective in their work. Typically, they use quieter and less chaotic methods of killing than their male counterparts. These female serial killers often use poisoning, shooting, stabbing, suffocating, and even drowning. Female serial killers murder for money or other profits. Some do so just for the attention and sympathy they receive following the death of someone they care for. And some female serial killers do not meet any of the criteria above. Occasionally, a female serial killer will become involved with a male serial killer as a part of a serial killing team. But that's for another Iceberg Explained. These women are strategic in their killings, and that is where we begin part 2 of the Serial Killer Iceberg Explained. Each video, I will dive into the lives of 4 serial killers and 1 honorable mention, from the most well-known killers to the most obscure. I will explain the murders and the events in these killers' lives with facts that even the most devoted crime buff may not know. Each week, there will be a different theme. For now, I will reveal that theme at the end of the video, so stay tuned to the very end. Then, after I have enough subscribers, I will post a contest at the end of each iceberg. You can submit your guess, and the first person to guess correctly will win a cash prize. So remember to subscribe. Disclaimer: some of this information is disturbing and gruesome. Please be advised. At the top of our iceberg is this week's most well-known female serial killer, none other than the woman that actor Charlize Theron played and won the Academy Award for Best Actress, Golden Globe for Best Actress, Critics' Choice Award for Best Actor, and numerous other accolades for the movie Monster, based on our first serial killer, Aileen Wuornos. Serial killer Aileen Wuornos, who helped to put female serial killers on the map, was convicted of murdering 6 men in Florida in 1989 and 1990. Wuornos had many encounters with the law, and by the 1980s, when she was making a living as a sex worker on Florida's highway, she began her killing spree. In late November of 1989, she earned the nickname Damsel of Death, and after she was arrested in January of 1991, she confessed to 7 murders before receiving the death sentence in the 6 cases brought against her. However, her sanity was questioned, and everyone who has seen photos of her knows why. Wuornos was executed in Florida State Prison by lethal injection in October of 2002. She was 46 at the age of her death. Aileen Wuornos was born in Rochester, Michigan on February 29, 1956. Her mother, Diane, was a teenage mother, and shortly after Aileen's birth, she and her older brothers were abandoned. Eileen's maternal grandparents legally adopted the two young children. Eileen never knew her biological father, who was eventually imprisoned for child rape and died by suicide while in custody. Until Eileen was around 10 years old, she did not know who she called mom and dad were actually her biological grandparents. This knowledge added more tension to an unhappy household. Her grandfather was a harsh disciplinarian who once had Warnos watch him drown a kitten. That had to leave a mark. Warnos later stated she was physically and sexually abused by her grandfather and had sexual relations with her brother during childhood. At the age of 11, Warnos was offering sexual favors to boys she knew if they paid her in cigarettes, resulting in her nickname, Cigarette Pig. Engaging in these sexual acts only further isolated Warnos from her peers. And at the age of 14, Eileen became pregnant and was sent to a Detroit home for unwed mothers. She gave birth to a boy in March of 1971. Her infant son was given up for adoption. Because it was a closed adoption, little is known about her son after giving birth. She dropped out of school and was in and out of juvenile detention for assault, disturbing the peace, and disorderly conduct. Many people do not know, but Eileen was only 20 in May of 1976 when she got married to a wealthy yachtsman named Louis Fell. He was 69 years old at the time. The marriage did not last long, as Fell left Warnos within a month. He said the reason was that she had a violent temper and would beat him with a cane. Warnos asserted that he was the one that attacked her. The two officially divorced in July of 1976. That same month, she experienced another trauma when her brother Keith died from cancer. In the early 1980s, Eileen stepped up her criminal game, and she served time for armed robbery after drunkenly attempting to rob a convenience store while wearing a bikini. As you can imagine why, I decided to forego that image. Warno's criminal history also included forged checks, resisting arrest, theft, drunk driving, and of course this was all before she picked up murder. Then, in June of 1986, Eileen, now calling herself Lee, met a 24-year-old Tyra Moore at a gay bar in Daytona, Florida. The two started an intense 4.5-year relationship and began living together. While Moore held jobs as a housekeeper or maid, Lee engaged in sex work along the Florida highway. From late 1989 to the fall of 1990, Warnos fatally shot 7 middle-aged and older men along the Florida highway. Her first victim was Richard Maloney, a 51-year-old repair shop owner who was known to frequently hire sex workers. He was last seen on November 30th, 1989. It was not until December of 1989 that his body was found in an illegal dumping site in the woods. 5 more dead bodies were discovered over the following months. The body of construction worker David Spears, who was 43, was found on June 1st, 1990. Part-time rodeo worker Charles was 40, went missing on May 31st, 1990. His remains were found on June 6th. On August 4th, 1990, 5 days after he was reported missing, salesman Tory Burgess, 50, was found dead. Then Charles Dick Murphy, 56, was a retired Air Force major who lived north of Crystal River, who was also a former police chief and Florida sex crimes abuse investigator. He was also found dead. Walker Antonia, a truck driver and reserve police officer who was in his 60s, was discovered on November 19, 1990. Throughout the time of Eileen's murder spree, she would return home to Moore with new possessions to pawn and cars that she borrowed from a good friend. In July of 1990, authorities examined the vehicle of Peter Sims, a 65-year-old missionary who'd gone missing the previous month. Witnesses described seeing Warnos and Moore leave the car, and a print from the door handle matched Warnos. In the fall of 1990, reports that authorities were looking for two women suspected of murder. Caught up in the criminal investigation that Eileen was at the forefront of, Moore fled Florida and turned against her girlfriend by helping the authorities. On January 9, 1991, Warnos was arrested at the Last Resort Bar in Port Orange, Florida, on an outstanding charge. Police then worked with Moore, where she was able to give a great deal of evidence against Warnos in order to avoid prosecution. In mid-January, Warnos admitted to murder in a phone call with Moore, saying she committed her crimes because she was desperately in love and wanted them to stay together. After her phone confession to Moore, and against the advice of counsel, police videotaped Warnos as she confessed to 7 murders. The public was fascinated by the case, due in part to the lewd nature of the crimes and the media description of Warnos as the country's first female serial killer, which you will later find out is a complete lie. She was dubbed the Damsel of Death. Warnos was first prosecuted for Mallory's murder. During the trial, Warnos claimed that she had been raped and assaulted, yet details didn't match her video confession. Although not revealed in court, Mallory was previously serving time for attempted sexual assault. However, no other sex workers came forward to recount a previous violent encounter, so no one will know the true facts of that day. A jury found Warnos, then 35, guilty of first-degree murder and robbery on January 27, 1992. The judge gave Warnos the death penalty on January 31st. 2 months later, Warnos pled no contest to the murder of Spears, Burroughs, and Humphreys. She then submitted separate guilty pleas for the murder of 2 other men. She received a death sentence for each plea. In early October of 2002, Florida Governor Jeb Bush lifted a temporary stay of execution after 3 psychologists deemed Warnos mentally competent to understand the death penalty and the reason for its implications. Warnos was then executed by lethal injection on October 9, 2002. At the time of her death, she was 46 years old. There have been many books and movies made about Warnos' life, as she continues to fascinate many people. In the final words of Eileen Warnos, they were actually her final words before she was executed. She declared, "I'd just like to say I'm sailing with the Rock, and I'll be back like Independence Day with Jesus, June 6th, like the movie, big mothership and all. I'll be back." She stayed defiant till the very end. Eileen Warnos was the first female serial killer sicko on this week's Serial Killer Iceberg. Do you know the theme of the week yet? And no, it's not just female serial killers. Now, stay tuned for our second woman killer. You have likely not heard about, even though she murdered 16 elderly women. Before we jump into Juana Barraza, first remember to like and subscribe, because once I have enough subscriber, the theme will be a paid competition. So subscribe and tell your friends today. In 2005, there was a serial killer on the loose, and the residents and police were shocked that the serial killer was a woman. Juana Barraza, she is known as Mexico's first female serial killer, even though that is not an accurate statement. She took the lives of at least 16 elderly women in the early 2000s and managed to evade capture for years, as police were looking for a male suspect. Known as the Little Old Lady Killer, Juana Barraza had made a name for herself as a pro wrestler, but neither her fans nor the police had any idea that by night she had been killing elderly women for years. In Mexico, professional wrestling is a popular form of entertainment, though it takes a slightly different form. Wrestlers wear colorful masks as they perform daring acrobatic leaps off the ropes and grapple with their opponent. Barraza was born in rural Mexico in 1957. Her father was a police officer and her mother an alcoholic prostitute. 3 months after her birth, her mother abandoned her husband to begin a relationship with a married man that would become her stepfather. As a child, she never learned to read and had a rocky relationship with her mother. Then, at the age of 12, her mother pimped her out for the first time to a man in return for 3 beers. She was abused for 4 years, impregnating her twice when she was 13 and 16. Both pregnancies resulted in a miscarriage. Barrazas finally left Mexico City after her mother died of cirrhosis. There, she underwent several failed marriages, from which she had 4 children. Her firstborn died in a gang shooting when he was only 24 years old. During the 1980s and 90s, Barraza held a variety of jobs and toured as a masked wrestler as the Lady of Silence, an alias she chose to reference her shy and silent personality. Then, in 1995, short on cash, after the birth of her fourth child, she began to steal items from shops and burglarize homes. In 1996, she hatched a plan with a friend to steal from the elderly. Barraza was methodical when choosing her victims. She managed to acquire a list of women who are on government assisted programs. Then she used this list to identify elderly women who lived alone and used fake credentials to pretend she was a nurse sent by the government to check their vital signs. She would approach her victims on the street or knock on the door, pretending to be a city council nurse or social worker. Initially, she would disguise herself in simple, dressed in white clothes, but later she acquired a genuine nurse's uniform. Depending on her victim's wealth, she would gain their trust and enter their home by offering massages or to help with medications. If her victims were distracted, she strangled them directly. If not, she would beat them first, using her wrestling moves. She carried a bag with her with medical tools as a part of her disguise. She would then strangle her victims, usually with ligatures taken from the victim's home, which she would leave at the scene of the crime. She would also rob her victims after killing them, mostly for her own gain, but she would also keep some items as a trophy. Brutal murders of elderly people in Mexico City began to increase in 1998, fueling press speculation about a serial killer. However, Mexico City police denied any connection between the crimes, and a number of people were imprisoned for these murders. Brazza's first victim was killed on November 25th, 2002, and she didn't kill again for 3 months. The crimes increased. She killed 7 people in 2003, and by November 5th of 2003, police had enough evidence and witness testimony to believe that a serial killer was involved. It was thought that this person was tall and posed as a nurse or social worker to gain the victim's trust. And in 2004, she escalated her killings to 14 people. And in 2005, she killed 17 people. In mid 2005, she began a relationship with a taxi driver who would become her accomplice. The attacks increased in range and frequency, and the time when the murders occurred changed from daytime to nighttime. The killing of an 82-year-old woman in September 28, 2005 was an upper-class woman and the mother of a prominent Mexican criminalist, spurred the police to launch a special investigation. Officer patrols in the area where the killer was active also increased, and the police announced that they were looking for a homosexual man, a transvestite or transgender, and arrested 49 transvestite prostitutes who were all released when their prints didn't match the crime scene. The lack of murders after October made investigators consider that the killer had committed suicide. However, on January 25th, 2006, Barraza was seen by a tenant as she left the murder scene, and she was arrested by a passing police patrolman. Though Barraza was illiterate, a search of her home found a trophy room with newspaper clippings of the murders, along with objects taken from the victims. In reality, She had been previously at this police station and interviewed by a TV program about wrestling just 1 week prior to her arrest, without arousing any suspicions. Then, in 2008, she was tried for 30 murders and was found guilty of 16 of them, and also of 12 robberies. The convictions were mostly for murders she was tied to through fingerprint evidence. She was sentenced to 759 years in prison, and she would be parole eligible at the age of 100. In the final words of Juana Barraza, she said, "May God forgive me and never forget me." Juana Barraza was the second female serial killer sicko on this week's Serial Killer Iceberg Explained. Do you know the theme of the week yet? And no, it's not just that they're all female serial killers. Now stay tuned for our third woman killer, a killer that even though she killed more than 40 people and disappeared without a trace, she is not a household name. Before we jump into Belle Gunness, first remember to like and subscribe, because once I have enough subscribers, the theme will be a paid competition. So subscribe and tell your friends today. Norwegian-born Belle Gunness immigrated to the U.S. in 1881 in a series of suspicious fires and deaths, mostly resulting in insurance awards. Gunness also began posting notices in love columns to entice wealthy men to her farm, after which they were never seen again. Authorities eventually found the remains of over 40 victims on her property, but Belle disappeared without a trace. Belle Gunness was born on November 11, 1859 in Norway. I am scared to admit I was also born on that day. She was the youngest of 8, and her father was a stonemason, and she immigrated to the United States in search of wealth. What followed were a series of insurance frauds and crimes, escalating in size and danger. In 1877, Belle was attacked and assaulted by a man, resulting in the loss of her unborn child. This had a lasting mark on who she would become. Gunness grew up poor, and she worked for years to save money so that she could move to the United States. And in 1881, when she was 21, she left her humble beginnings to start a life in America. Upon her arrival in the U.S., she settled in Chicago, changing her name to Belle Peterson, and worked for a long time as a servant. In Chicago, Belle married a fellow Norwegian in 1884. The couple came into some money 2 years later and opened a store. And in 1884, their store and home mysteriously burned down. The couple claimed the insurance money for both. Whether or not the couple had children is a subject of debate, but official census data supports the claim that they had 4 children. Whether they were their own or foster children is still unclear. It is also speculated that Belle poisoned 2 of the children during infancy for the insurance money. Belle's husband then died of heart failure on the same day his 2 insurance policies matured. Coincidence? I think not. Though her husband's family demanded an inquiry, no charges were filed. Belle then moved to Indiana and married another Norwegian man, Peter Gunness, in April 1902. His wife had recently died, leaving him 2 young girls. This would be no happy affair, though. Within a week of their marriage, the youngest of Peter's daughter passed away under suspicious circumstances. And 8 months later, Peter also died under mysterious circumstances. Anyone who found themselves in Belle Gunness's presence would sooner or later be found dead. While Belle claimed that Peter was accidentally hit in the back of the head with a sausage grinder, I have no idea how that would accidentally happen. Many believe that she was responsible for his death. You think? Gunness then began meeting wealthy men through a love connection column in the newspaper. Her suitors were her next victim, each of whom brought cash to her farm and then disappeared forever. In 1908, Gunnis's luck seemed to be running out. Her farmhouse burnt to the ground. In its smoldering ruins, workmen discovered 4 skeletons. 3 were identified as her foster children. However, the 4th, believed to be Belle Gunnis herself. But the body was missing its skull. After the fire, her victims were unearthed from the shallow graves around the farm. All told, the remains of more than 40 men and children were exhumed. Gunnis's hired hand was arrested for murder and arson on May 22, 1908. He was found guilty of arson, but cleared of murder. He died in prison, but not before revealing the truth about Belle Gunnis and her crimes, including burning her own house down. The bodies that were recovered was not hers. Gunnis had planned the entire thing and skipped town after withdrawing most of the money from her bank accounts. She was never tracked down, and her death was never confirmed. For decades after the fire, Gunnis was sighted across the United States. Yet these alleged sightings could not be confirmed or verified. The actual facts of Belle Gunnis' death is always going to be a mystery. In the final words of Belle Gunnis, from one of her newspaper love columns, she states, "Wanted, a woman who owns a beautiful farm in first-class condition, wants a good man as a partner in same. Some little cash is required and will be furnished first-class security. Anyone interested in the ad was directed to contact BG in care of the newspaper." Belle Gunnis was the 3rd serial killer on this week's Iceberg. Do you know the theme of the week yet? Now, stay tuned for our 4th serial killer. A killer that you likely don't know, but she killed 4 of her 5 husbands, and authorities believe she may have killed many more of her own blood relatives. Before we jump into Nanny Doss, the Giggling Nanny, first remember to like and subscribe, because once I have enough subscribers, the theme will be a paid competition. So subscribe today. Nanny Doss seems like a sweet old lady. She smiles and laughs all the time. She's married, has 4 children, and spent time with her grandchildren. Despite the happy, joyful woman, there was a trail of death and murder that lasted from 1920 to 1954. And in 1954, Nanny Doss confessed to killing 4 of her 5 husbands, and authorities believe she may have killed many more of her own family members. Nanny Doss was born to a family of farmers in 1905 in Blue Mountain, Alabama. Instead of going to school, all 5 of Jim and Louise Hazel's children stayed at home to work on household chores and tend to the family farm. At age 7, Nanny suffered a head injury while riding a train. The head injury changed her life forever. By the time she was a teenager, Doss dreamed of living an idyllic life with her future husband, reading romance magazines, especially the Lonely Hearts column. I wonder if she ever read Belle Gunnis's posts. Perhaps she used the hope for romance as an escape from her abusive father, while her mother turned a blind eye. At the age of 16, Nanny wed a man she had only known for 4 months. Charlie Braggs and she had 4 children together from 1921 to 1927. The marriage then fell apart at that point. The happy couple lived with Charlie's mother, but she had the same abusive type behavior as Nanny's father. And perhaps it was her mother-in-law that kick-started her murdering spree. In 1927, 2 of their children died under mysterious circumstances. One moment, the kids were perfectly healthy, and then suddenly they were both dead for no apparent reason. Just a year after her divorce, Nanny married her second husband. He was an abusive alcoholic from Jacksonville, Florida. The two met through a Lonely Hearts column. He wrote her love letters while Nanny responded with racy letters and photos. Despite the abuse, the marriage lasted for 16 years until 1945. During this time, Nanny likely killed her own newborn granddaughter a few days after the birth by using a hairpin to stab her in the brain. A few months after her granddaughter's death, her 2-year-old grandson, Robert, died of asphyxiation while in Nanny's care. These two kids belonged to Nanny's oldest child from her first husband. Nanny's second husband was next on the murder list. Following a drunken night, Nanny mixed a secret ingredient into a hidden jar of moonshine. He died less than a week later on September 15th, 1945. People thought he died of food poisoning. Meanwhile, Nanny collected enough insurance money for his death to buy a plot of land and a house near Jacksonville. Another victim of Nanny's was in Arlington, North Carolina. Died in 1952, several years after he responded to a Lovely Hearts classified ad placed by Nanny. Playing the doting wife, she added poison to one of his meals, and he died shortly thereafter. He was a heavy drinker, so the doctor attributed the heart attack to alcohol. Richard Morton of Imperial, Kansas, was Nanny's next true love, although he spent a lot of time with another woman. Though Nanny didn't discover this just yet because she was the caretaker to her mother, who fell and broke her hip in 1953. Nanny's mother suddenly died after Nanny started taking care of her. Shortly after her mother's death, Nanny's sister also suddenly died. A lot of people keep suddenly dying around her. Nanny was too consumed with her mother's health to find out about her husband's affairs. But after she took care of her mother and sister, she turned her full attention on her cheating husband. He soon died under mysterious circumstances. Her final victim was Samuel Doss of Tulsa, Oklahoma. He was neither a drunk nor abusive. He simply made the mistake of telling his wife that she could only read magazines or watch television shows that were for educational purposes. Nanny was not about to be told what to do, and she laced a prune cake with poison. Samuel Doss spent a month recovering in the hospital. A few days after he got home, poison-laden coffee finished him off. This is where Nanny Doss made a mistake. The doctor who treated her fifth and final husband was suspected foul play during the month-long hospitalization, but he had no proof. So the doctor convinced Nanny, who was receiving 2 life insurance benefits after his death, to let him do an autopsy. The physician said it was a good idea because the autopsy could help save lives. The doctor found huge amounts of arsenic in Samuel Doss's body and alerted police. Nanny Doss was arrested in 1954. She soon confessed to killing 4 of her 5 husbands, but not her other family members. Authorities exhumed some of Doss's previous victims and found extraordinary amounts of arsenic and rat poison in their bodies. The giggling granny's calling card was to poison her loved ones with drinks or food spiked with these poisons. In all, authorities suspect she killed as many as 12 people, most of whom were blood relatives. Since most of her husbands had other underlying health issues, such as alcoholism or a heart condition, doctors and authorities never suspected a thing. Nanny Doss died in prison in 1964 while serving a life sentence. In my final words about Nanny Doss, she said, "I was searching for the perfect mate." Nanny Doss was the 4th female serial killer on this week's Serial Killer Iceberg Explained. Do you know the theme of the week yet? Now stay tuned for our honorable mention of the week, a killer that does not make the serial killer list, but is also not a woman I want in my circle of friends. as this case was called the single worst crime perpetrated against an individual in Indiana's history. Before we jump into Gertrude Bienazuski, first remember to like and subscribe, because once I have enough subscribers, the theme will be a paid competition. So subscribe and tell your friends today. Gertrude Bienazuski, also known as the Torture Mother, is our honorable mention of this iceberg. She was an Indiana divorcee who oversaw and facilitated the prolonged torture, mutilation, and eventual murder of Sylvia Likens. This case is unique in that while Bienazuski did play an active role in her death, the majority of the torture and the murder was carried out by her teenage children and other neighborhood kids. Gertrude was born in 1929, and she was the third of six children. Little is known about her childhood, except that she had a close relationship with her father, and when she watched him die of a sudden heart attack, she became estranged from her mother. At the age of 16, Gertrude dropped out of school and got married and had four children. Her husband, John, had a violent temper and often beat her for simply annoying him. In the summer of 1965, Gertrude agreed to take in two neighborhood girls, Sylvia and Jenny, as boarders. The first week of them in the Baniszewski home was reported to have gone relatively well. They attended school and even church. Then, when the girl's father did not pay the $20 for them to stay at the house, Gertrude threw a temper tantrum, screaming at the girls, "I took care of you two bitches for nothing," before forcing them to lie across her bed with their skirts and underwear around their ankles while she beat their buttocks. Gertrude soon focused all of her attention on Sylvia and would engage in horrific acts of violence toward her, such as burning the tips of each of her fingers with a lit cigarette, or whipping her with a belt, kicking her in the crotch, throwing her down a flight of stairs, and the most disturbing was forcing her to stand naked and masturbate with a glass bottle in front of the neighborhood boys. Gertrude then locked Sylvia in the basement. Gertrude's children turned Sylvia into a money-making opportunity, with her daughter Paula as one of the leaders. She would charge neighborhood children a nickel to look at Sylvia naked or push her down the stairs. Gertrude even branded Sylvia, burning the letter I and part of the letter M into her stomach. Then had a neighborhood kid finish carving "I'm a prostitute and proud of it" into Sylvia's stomach. Sylvia was tortured for approximately 3 months. During the night and into the morning hours of October 25th, Sylvia beat the basement floor and begged for help. Neighbors would later report considering calling the police, but chose not to. Those neighbors should have been brought up on charges also, because on October 26th, Sylvia was found dead. When the police got to the house, Jenny Likens, Sylvia's sister, whispered to one of the police officers, "Get me out of here and I'll tell you everything." And they did. The trial began in May of 1966. The prosecution sought the death penalty for all involved, but Gertrude's attorney attempted to shift blame to the children, portraying her as weak and chronically ill, and the children's attorney attempted to put all the blame on Gertrude. Gertrude was found guilty of murder in the first degree. To the shock of citizens of Indianapolis, she did not receive the death penalty, but rather life in prison without the possibility of parole. But she appealed, and it was granted a new trial. And she was found guilty, although this time she was sentenced to 18 years to life. Over the course of the next 18 years, she became a model prisoner, working in the sewing shop and becoming a den mother to young female inmates. By the time she was able to parole in 1985, she had earned the prison nickname Mom. That is so disturbing on so many levels. Gertrude Baniszewski walked out of prison on December 4th, 1985, and died of lung cancer in 1990. The fates of all Baniszewski children is somewhat unknown, except Paula moved to Iowa and assumed a new identity. Rumors claim that she is still alive and lives on a farm somewhere. Stephanie became a school teacher and assumed a new identity. How is she allowed to work with children? And John changed his name to John Blake, not overly creative, and worked as a truck driver before becoming a real estate agent. Gertrude Baniszewski, our honorable mention and final sicko. She is not classified as a serial killer. However, she is beyond demented and she should have rotten in prison and died there. I take that back. She should have been tortured. Did you figure out the theme? The theme of this Iceberg Explained was that, yes, all five of these women are women, but they were also victims of abuse themselves. Thank you for watching, and remember to subscribe, like, and share. Stay tuned for the next serial killer Iceberg Explained, and remember, once there's enough subscriber, the theme will be guessed for a cash prize. Till next time, and remember, stay safe.